Welcome to Republic Baptist Church Men's Sunday School class. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. Today is December the 27th, 2020. Today we are in the fourth session of the topic, When Emotions Rise. The title of today's lesson is Redirecting Anger. The point of today's lesson is, take your anger to God and leave matters in His hands. The scripture for today's lesson comes from Psalms chapter 35, verses 1 through 3, and verses 13 through 18. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler, and stand up for mine help. Draw out also the spear, and stop the way against them that persecute me. Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned into mine own bosom. I behaved myself as though he had been my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily, as one that mourned for his mother. But in mine adversity they rejoiced and gathered themselves together. Yea, the abjects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me, and ceased not. With hypocritical mockers in feast, they gnashed upon me with their teeth. Lord, how long wilt thou look on? Rescue my soul from their destructions, my darling from the lions. I will give thee thanks in the great congregation. I will praise thee among much people. Small children can get mad about the silliest things. And if they catch us giggling, they only get madder. Parents report their children as having gotten mad because the moon was in the sky during the day. Her picture wasn't in our wedding album. His ice cream was too cold. I wouldn't let him wipe his nose with a piece of bread. Unfortunately, we also can get angry as adults, and for equally silly reasons. Someone chews his food too loudly. Someone in front of you is walking or driving too slowly. Someone asks a question that was just answered moments ago. And someone puts you on hold for longer than a minute. In fact, that's one that just happened to me recently. Someone called me about a critical matter. And after I answered the phone, they put me on hold, and I was on hold for 30 minutes. I guess I got upset. I hope I didn't get too angry. It was an important matter, and we got the situation resolved, I think. But we get angry over silly reasons. But admit it, you've become angry over something petty, just like I have. At other times, more serious matters push the anger button. Slander, threats, and unjust actions. Do we give in to anger, or is there a better way? In Psalms 35, David had good reasons to be angry, but he took a different route. It's a route we should consider when anger starts to well up inside us. Many of us have played the game of one-upmanships. We play it when we try to look better than the next person. We're taking a trip to Europe this summer. We also play a negative version of the game. You think you had it bad? Let me tell you how sick I was. You wouldn't want to play that game against King David. When it comes to opposition and roadblocks in life, David's list most likely would be far longer and greater than yours or mine. Opposition comes in many forms. We view anything that keeps us from what we want to think or deserve as opposition. And these things can stir up anger in us. Ever gotten riled up because you can't find the TV remote? We get upset because it keeps us from what we want, the joy of channel surfing. My point is, it doesn't take much to see something as opposition. Rank the following forms of opposition from least to greatest, 1 to 4. Being cut off in traffic. Oh yeah, that one got to rank right up there at the tops. Shopper with too many items in the express lane at checkout. Oh boy, I've been there. Receiving no offer to split the bill or expense. Well, I don't know about that one, but I guess some people would get angry over something like that. And having to cook and do the dishes. Well, my wife probably would get upset over that as well. What are some other pet peeves that really make your blood boil? One of mine is interruptions when I'm involved in any task, no matter how important. I just hate interruptions. Interruptions cause my blood to boil. And what's the first thing you typically do when you feel angry? I probably yell at the one I love, or at least growl in disgust. But David faced real and serious opposition. David likely penned Psalm 35 during the period of his life when King Saul was pursuing him. After David's victory over Goliath, he quickly rose in popularity with the people. He served in Saul's court, and he was successful in everything he did. David never sought to usurp King Saul. But that was not how Saul viewed David. It didn't help that the popular song of the day was, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. You can find that in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 7. God's hand obviously was on David. The prophet Samuel already had informed Saul, your reign will not endure. The Lord has found a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people. That would be in chapter 13, verse 14. Even before David's name became well known, after he killed Goliath and became successful in Saul's army, Samuel appointed him and declared that he was the one God had chosen to be the next king. That's chapter 16, verses 12 and 13. Even though David remained loyal to Saul and served him faithfully, he eventually had to run for his life. From then until Saul's death, David lived in the wilderness. To have David out of the court, to have David out of his court and the public eye was not enough for Saul. He relentlessly chased after David with the single-minded intent of killing him. Read the full account of Saul's animosity in 1 Samuel chapters 18 through 26. It's in this context that David cried out, oppose my opponents, Lord. Fight those who fight me. This psalm is called an imprecatory psalm, one in which the writer calls on God to bring harm and disaster on his enemy. Many people are uncomfortable with these psalms because they seem diametrically opposed to Jesus' command to love our enemies, Matthew 5:44. Lest we think David is mean-spirited with no love in his heart, two things in David's life are worth noting. 1. David had an easy opportunity to kill his enemy twice. On one occasion, Saul went to relieve himself in the very cave where David and his men were hiding. David crept up and cut off the corners of Saul's robe to prove that he could have harmed Saul, but he would never lift his hand against the one God had anointed. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 1 through 11. Another time, David crept into Saul's camp while he was sleeping and took the javelin and water jug that were inches from Saul's head. Chapter 26, verses 7 through 12. From a distance, David then called out to Saul, "The Lord will repay every man for his righteousness and his loyalty. I wasn't willing to lift my hand against the Lord's anointed, even though the Lord handed you over to me, just as I considered your life valuable today. So may the Lord consider my life valuable and rescue me from all trouble." Verses 23 through 24. And secondly, David took the matter to God. David didn't seek vengeance. He sought God. Read the psalm through verse 8 and you will see a cry for David's read this psalm through verse 8 and you see a cry for David's opponents to be disgraced, humiliated, shamed, and ruined. David expressed his anger and frustration to God, but he left the matter there. David surely knew what God said in the law. "Vengeance belongs to me. The Lord will indeed vindicate his people." Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 35 through 36. To whom do we turn when we face opposition and anger arises up? We may turn inward and fume about it, or we may lie in our beds envisioning creative retribution. We may take our anger to others, recruiting them to join in our anger. David models a better approach. Take the matter to God. Even though David offered suggestions to God on what he should do, he prayed and trusted him and looked for his assurance, "I am your deliverance." What might keep us from being honest with God about our anger? Well, anger sometimes can get ugly, and we don't want to look ugly to anyone, especially to God. It's wonderful to watch two people fight. It's wonderful to watch two people find each other and fall in love. Their wedding is a picture of undying love, but it's a shock to hear that just a few years later, one spouse turns to the other and says, "I don't love you anymore." And just like that, one partner walks away, leaving the other blindsided and devastated. That's a story many people know by heart. Unfaithfulness and divorce rip families apart. And those once loved and supported become enemies. It doesn't happen just between married couples. Good friends, even best friends, turn their backs and begin to work against those they used to support through thick and thin. That's why David's situation was so hard. Those who sought to kill him were the very ones he cared for most. We've already noted the relationship between Saul and David. David served Saul faithfully. He had been a military leader for Saul, and he had served alongside many of those soldiers who were now pursuing him. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5. How would you typically respond when you are mistreated? For those who think David was being unusually harsh in this psalm, note that David sincerely prayed for these men. David wasn't guilty of the casual prayer in passing. He didn't say, "I'll pray for you," and then promptly forget. For their sake, he changed his clothes. I imagine it's rather hard to forget to pray when your clothes of sackcloth are so itchy. He fasted. He mourned for them. He was bowed down with grief. His prayer was genuine. In an ideal setting, David had previously prayed for and cared about. In an ideal setting, those David had previously prayed for and cared about would do the same for him when he stumbled. They would have come alongside David, praying, fasting, and seeking the best for him. But instead, they gathered in glee, gathered against me. Others joined David's former friends, in his feeding frenzy. Assailants I did not know tore at me and did not stop. When friends or family turn on us, it can be tempting to respond in kind. I tried to be nice, but if he's going to be that way, I can do it too. When Jesus spoke of loving our enemies, he said, "For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brother and sisters, what are you doing out of the ordinary?" You can find that in Matthew chapter 5, verses 46 and 47. Even when our friends and loved ones turn on us, we don't change our tune. We are to continue loving. Jesus exemplified this for us. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before his shears, he did not open his mouth. Isaiah 53:7. But God proves his own love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. We are not to respond in anger or retaliation. We are to respond in love. Loving those who anger us or seek to harm is the best way to get back at them. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For in doing so, you will be heaping fiery coals on his head. Do not be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. Romans chapter 12, verses 20 and 21. What helps you trust God when you've been hurt by others? Saul took his hatred of David to the battlefield. He responded as a warrior, chasing the one he perceived to be his enemy to kill him. David was well known as a mighty warrior, but he appealed to God to be the warrior on his behalf. He was also appealing to God lost my place here. Let's see. He was also appealing to God as his advocate and judge. He needed to be rescued from known as a mighty warrior to be appealed to God as the mighty warrior on his. I think without God's intervention, David's life was truly in danger. David asked God to rescue my precious life from the young lions. The heart of David's prayer and appeal to God was for rescue, not retaliation. Underneath David's words in his Psalms, "Oppress my opponents, let those be disgraced and humiliated, let their way be dark and slippery, let ruin come on him unexpectedly," was a desire to be rescued. Their demise was not his goal. His rescue was. David's attitude and heart toward his enemy was evident at Saul's death. When Saul died in battle, David did not rejoice, saying, "Yes, my prayer has been answered." Instead, David grieved for Saul as well as for Israel. We feel no retaliation or sense of vengeance when we grieve over the defeat of those who seek our downfall. David's other Psalms reflect an unwavering trust in God, as we will see in the next session study of Psalm 23. So, we can assume David's closing words in Psalm 35 reflect the same trust. David had faith that God would rescue him. He didn't just know when. "Lord, how long will you look on? David knew God would rescue him, but he was ready to be rescued right then. We also see David's trust in his praise of God. Things did not look favorable for David at this moment. He had not yet experienced the rescue he sought from God, but he approached life with a renewed determination. I will praise you. I will exalt you. David had expressed similar praise in verse 9. But here David would offer his praise and worship in the great assembly among many people. To offer public praise in the thick of frustrating, anger-provoking circumstances is a great testimony of our trust in God. We honor Him when we choose to express trust rather than outrage and retaliation. In my early 20s, I worked in a pharmaceutical warehouse. An order came in late in the day from a local hospital. As the operations manager, I delivered the order to the floor supervisor, who proceeded to tell me what she thought of this late order and what she thought of me. I just listened and then returned to my office. As I walked away, one man said, I want to know what makes you different. I would have blown up if she talked to me that way. When we feel a tug of anger in our hearts, we can let it loose and deal with the circumstances later, or we can give the urge over to God and leave matters in His hands. It's healthier. It honors God, and you never know who's watching. What makes leaving matters in God's hand so challenging? I guess it's because we want to be in control, and we want to see immediate results from the retaliation or whatever results is going to be as a resolution. When anger begins to brew, how will you respond? Vent to God. Before talking to others about what has upset you, talk to God. Be honest with God about why you're angry. Ask Him for the strength to refrain from anger and the will to trust Him with the situation. Seek resolution and not retaliation. If possible, find a way to resolve the relationship or situation that has angered you. At the very least, pray for the well-being of the other person. As you genuinely pray for another person, God will also work on your heart. Love no matter what. Find specific, concrete ways you can show the love of Christ to those who've hurt you or made you angry. Don't take any action to look self-righteous or better than the other person. Show love in order to honor the one who loves you. That's the end of today's lesson, and this will be the last lesson of this year. 2021 is just around the corner, and next Sunday we'll hopefully start off a better year. And hopefully you'll join me, and I look forward to having my next Sunday school lesson with you next week. Until then.